Teach me to dance, will you?
Did you say dance? Come on, my boy.
For most of his life, Anthony Quinn was an open book about Hollywood legends. He joked, told stories, and looked back without holding anything in. But there was always one name that shifted the mood: Charles Bronson. Bring him up, and the laughter stopped. It wasn't nostalgia that followed, but a long pause. Years later, when Quinn finally spoke about Bronson directly, he didn't shower him with praise, and he didn't attack him either. Instead, he said something far more unsettling, something that cracked the image Hollywood had carefully built. And once you hear it, it's hard to ever look at Bronson the same way again. The origin story: Hollywood ignores. Anthony Rudolph Oaxaca Quinn entered the world in the middle of real gunfire, not metaphorical struggle, but an actual war zone. He was born in Chihuahua, Mexico, while the Mexican Revolution was tearing the country apart. His parents weren't spectators to history either. His father, Frank, an Irish immigrant, and his mother, Manuela, who was Mexican with Native American roots, were both actively involved in the fighting alongside Pancho Villa. When the danger became too much, Frank fled north to escape federal troops. Manuela followed soon after, crossing the border into the United States with baby Anthony in her arms. They ended up in California, but safety didn't mean comfort. The family lived the harsh life of migrant workers, moving back and forth between the San Joaquin and Napa valleys, chasing crops and survival. By the time Anthony was 4 or 5 years old, he was already working in the fields with his parents, earning 10 cents an hour on his knees under the sun. Those early years never left him. Decades later, in his autobiography, The Original Sin, Quinn described driving through the rolling hills of Santa Barbara with his first wife. She admired the beauty of the landscape, remembering childhood horseback rides with her school friends. But Quinn saw something else entirely. The same hills reminded him of the humiliation and exhaustion of earning a living bent low to the ground. Growing up caught between two identities became one of the defining struggles of his life. He once admitted that those years were simply hard, with no softer word for them. His last name kept him at arm's length from the Mexican community, and his heritage did the same with Americans. So he made a decision early on. He would belong to neither side and to both at once. He declared himself a world citizen and later summed it up with a line that became legend. Acting was his nationality. When he was 6, the family relocated to East Los Angeles, settling into a small house on the corner of Brooklyn and Hazard Avenue. The house is gone now, and the street has a new name. Today, that exact spot is a parking lot for the Anthony Quinn Library, a place that once served as the Belvedere branch of the L.A. Public Library before being renamed in his honor in 1983. It's a quiet but powerful full-circle moment. There's long been confusion about his father's work in Hollywood, with some biographies calling him a cameraman. Quinn later corrected that record himself. His father was actually a property man at the Selig Film Studio. That connection to the movie world ended abruptly when Quinn was only 9 years old, after his father was killed in a car accident, leaving a hole that never fully closed. Quinn attended Hamel Street Elementary, Belvedere Junior High, and then Polytechnic High School, where he showed early talent in art and architecture. He left school without a degree, but he never stopped learning. Instead, he designed his own education, pushing himself every week to read a new book, listen to a symphony he'd never heard before, and study a different work of art. It was discipline, but it was also hunger. That hunger eventually brought him face to face with Frank Lloyd Wright. Quinn showed the legendary architect some supermarket designs he had drawn, hoping for feedback. Wright barely mentioned the drawings. Instead, he told Quinn that if he ever wanted to speak clearly, he needed surgery to fix his speech impediment. The comment changed his life. Wright became a lifelong friend, and after the surgery, he encouraged Quinn to take acting lessons simply to practice speaking properly. Before acting took hold, Quinn tested himself in other arenas. He became a professional boxer and won his first 16 fights in a row. But when he was knocked out in his 17th, he walked away for good, realizing he didn't have the kind of instinct it took to keep going in that world. Music was another outlet. He taught himself the saxophone and formed a small orchestra that played at local dances around Los Angeles. That passion eventually led him to Amy Semple McPherson's Foursquare Gospel Church, where he joined the band at the Angelus Temple in Echo Park. For a brief moment, he even preached. It's a forgotten chapter of his life, but once you know it, that massive Pope of Broadway mural in downtown Los Angeles suddenly feels a lot more personal. From stage novice to Hollywood giant. Anthony Quinn stepped onto the stage for the first time in 1936, and he didn't exactly ease his way in. His debut came in a play called Clean Beds, where he took on a role originally written for John Barrymore himself. To pull it off, the young actor spent the entire performance doing a full-on Barrymore impression. Voice, rhythm, swagger, all of it. Then came opening night in Los Angeles, and with it, the kind of pressure that could break a newcomer. John Barrymore was sitting in the audience. Backstage, panic spread through the cast and crew. Everyone knew what was at stake. After the curtain fell, Barrymore walked straight backstage, looking for the young man who had just spent 2 hours imitating him. Quinn never forgot the moment. Barrymore filled the doorway, studied him for a long second, and then gave him the highest compliment possible. He told him he was marvelous. When Barrymore learned Quinn was only 21, the moment turned into something much bigger. He invited him over, took him under his wing, and became a mentor. Years later, Quinn would say that most people remembered Barrymore as a clever man or a heavy drinker. But what stood out to him was something deeper: his courage. Barrymore taught him that an artist could only be as right as he dared to be wrong, and that mastery came from taking big risks. As a final gesture, Barrymore handed Quinn the armor he had worn in Richard III. To Quinn, it felt like a matador passing his sword to the next fighter, a silent sign that he had been chosen. That same year, 1936, Quinn made his first appearance on the big screen. It was quick, barely 45 seconds long, in a film called Parole. He played a convict who gets stabbed, and if you blinked, you missed him. But the moment meant everything to him. He brought his grandmother to the premiere, and afterward, she told him he was going to be a big star. 2 weeks later, she passed away, never getting the chance to see that prediction come true. And for a while, it looked like it might not. Quinn ran straight into the walls of discrimination, and progress came painfully slow. His next major opportunity came when he was cast as a Cheyenne Indian in Cecil B. DeMille's epic The Plainsman, opposite Gary Cooper. Getting the role took nerve. Quinn convinced DeMille he was actually Cheyenne and even invented a fake dialect on the spot. It worked. That film changed his life in more ways than one. On set, he met his future father-in-law, Cecil B. DeMille himself. A year later, Quinn married DeMille's adopted daughter, actress Catherine DeMille. She became the first of his 3 wives, and over their 19-year marriage, they had 5 of his eventual 13 children. Having one of the most powerful men in Hollywood as family might sound like a golden ticket, but it wasn't. DeMille didn't fast-track Quinn to stardom. Instead, Quinn spent years grinding through small roles in B-movies like Waikiki Wedding and Texas Rangers Ride Again. He stayed busy, but he was far from being a leading man. In 1941, tragedy struck the family. Their young son, Christopher, still a toddler, wandered off and onto the nearby estate of W.C. Fields in Los Feliz. He fell into a fish pond and drowned, a loss that left a permanent scar on Quinn's life. Looking back at his film career from 1936 to 1947, Quinn was working constantly, but mostly in parts that barely registered. Nothing truly broke through. That finally changed in 1947, when he stepped onto a Broadway stage for the first time in Gentlemen from Athens. And just like that, the door cracked open. This was the break he'd been waiting on. That one role led straight into something much bigger, a 2-year touring run as Stanley Kowalski in Elia Kazan's A Streetcar Named Desire. Night after night, city after city, people started to see what Quinn had been trying to prove all along. But the real shift came in the 1950s. That's when Anthony Quinn stopped being just another working actor and became a name people actually recognized. The turning point was Viva Zapata, where he played the older brother of Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata, acting alongside Marlon Brando. That performance earned Quinn his first Academy Award, and it sent a clear message to Hollywood: he had arrived. Even if the industry still wasn't quite ready to give him the spotlight, there was no ignoring him anymore. Despite the Oscar, Quinn kept finding himself overlooked for leading roles. Instead of waiting around, he made a bold move and went to Italy to find the kind of work Hollywood wasn't offering him. That decision changed everything. He became Zampano, the rough circus strongman in Federico Fellini's La Strada, a performance that showed a rawness audiences hadn't seen before. Not long after, he played the tortured painter Paul Gauguin in Lust for Life, and that role brought him his second Oscar. By the early 1960s, Quinn had become a towering presence in film. He was suddenly everywhere, anchoring massive productions like The Guns of Navarone, Lawrence of Arabia, and Requiem for a Heavyweight. He had the weight, the voice, the gravity. But one role would rise above them all and define how the world remembered him. In 1964, Quinn became Alexis Zorba in Zorba the Greek. It wasn't just another performance. It was one of those rare moments where an actor and a character merge so completely that the line between them disappears. Zorba was loud, earthy, joyful, and unbreakable. A man who moved through life like a force of nature. This wasn't a man who gently encouraged others to live. He pushed them into it. Zorba pulled people out of their shells, fixed what was broken, and demanded that love and joy exist, even when life tried to crush them. His energy was overwhelming and somehow healing. And then there was the dance. Quinn wasn't a trained dancer at all, but when he stepped onto that beach and did the now legendary Zorba shuffle, it became pure cinema. It didn't matter that the steps were simple or even clumsy. What mattered was the feeling. His body seemed to pull rhythm straight from the ground, as if the earth itself was moving him. That scene turned into a symbol of freedom, of survival, of choosing joy no matter what. He was nominated for an Oscar for the role, but he didn't win. Still, it didn't matter. Zorba became immortal. On screen, Quinn looked like a man who simply could not be destroyed, someone who lived out loud and had no patience for hesitation or overthinking. His will to live felt stronger than any tragedy life could throw at him. Some critics later joked, not always kindly, that Quinn loved Zorba so much he spent the rest of his career playing versions of the same character. And in truth, they weren't entirely wrong. Nearly 20 years after the film, Quinn brought Zorba to Broadway. The stage version turned into a phenomenon, running for years and touring across the United States. By the end of its run, the show had been performed more than 1,200 times and had earned over $48 million, making it one of the most successful revivals in theater history. But for Quinn, the stage version wasn't just a triumph. It became something much more personal. Night after night, the role forced him to confront a grief he had avoided for decades: the death of his son. In the story, Zorba speaks about losing his own child, and those moments cut straight into Quinn's life. For more than 40 years, he had never spoken openly about his son's death, not even saying the word out loud. At first, he removed the line from the script because he couldn't bring himself to say it, but the director insisted it stay. As the performances went on, Quinn began to understand the character in a new way. Zorba loved his son so deeply that the pain drove him away from his own family, because staying near them hurt too much. In that truth, Quinn finally saw himself. And through Zorba, standing under the lights night after night, he began to heal. The hidden struggles of a giant. As Anthony Quinn moved into the later chapters of his career, slowing down was never really an option. Even in his late 60s and early 70s, he was still in constant motion, bouncing from one demanding role to the next. In 1988, he stepped onto the small screen as Greek shipping titan Aristotle Onassis in Onassis, the richest man in the world, bringing his usual mix of power and complexity to the role. 2 years later, he took on one of literature's most physically demanding characters, the old fisherman in Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. And not long after that, he found himself sharing the screen with Katharine Hepburn in the CBS film This Can't Be Love. But that relentless pace came with a cost. While filming the brutal ocean scenes for The Old Man and the Sea in the Virgin Islands, Quinn began feeling sharp chest pains. At first, he pushed through, the way he always had. But once production wrapped and he finally saw a doctor, the news hit hard. 2 of his arteries were nearly completely blocked, and the rest, as he later described, were in rough shape. The doctors laid out the options carefully. He could avoid surgery, take medication, and keep living cautiously. Quinn wasn't interested in cautious. At 73 years old, he made his choice with the same blunt confidence that defined his life. He checked himself into Mount Sinai Hospital and went straight for coronary bypass surgery, believing it would either fix him or finish him. His publicist explained that he'd been feeling discomfort for weeks, but the medical team was calm. He was in exceptional physical shape, and by 1990, bypass surgery had become a routine procedure. The operation lasted 3 hours and went perfectly. Just 1 week after leaving the hospital, Quinn was back in his New York office, already moving like a man reborn. He told reporters he felt stronger than he had in years. Before long, he was walking 3 miles a day, telling anyone who asked that he felt like a bull. That intensity, though, had always been part of the deal. When Quinn took on a role, he didn't just perform it, he lived inside it. And sometimes, that kind of commitment pushed back. During The Shoes of the Fisherman, where he played the Pope, and again while portraying Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, he developed a strange skin condition that baffled doctors and halted production. No one could explain it. The cure finally came from a French physician who, instead of writing a prescription, handed him a book. It was Saviors of God by Nikos Kazantzakis, and inside its pages was an explanation that changed everything. The book described young boys preparing for priesthood centuries earlier who would break out in a rash the night before taking their vows, a reaction known as saint's disease. The realization hit hard. Quinn's body wasn't sick. It was reacting to the emotional and spiritual weight of the roles. Once he understood that, the condition disappeared. Even with all that intensity, Quinn never lost his sense of poetry about life. Sitting in a hotel suite with his daughter one day, he reflected on his journey with a kind of peaceful humor. He felt lucky, he said. When he was young, people took him in. Now that he was old, it was all downhill. And for someone who loved cycling, downhill was the best part of the ride. By 1990, Quinn was talking seriously about retirement. He even admitted that acting embarrassed him. To him, it was a profession built on rejection, one that required a thick hide just to survive. He called it a terrible job and claimed he wanted out as soon as he could manage it. But walking away proved impossible. This was a man who still remembered shining shoes for pennies as a child in Los Angeles. And that work ethic never faded. Even as he talked about retiring at 74, he kept signing on to new projects. He had just finished films with Kevin Costner and Bo Derek and was starring in a major NBC adaptation of The Old Man and the Sea, stepping into a role that Spencer Tracy had made famous decades earlier. In the 1990s, he appeared in A Walk in the Clouds, directed by Alfonso Arau in his first English-language film. The cast was international and carefully chosen, with Quinn playing Don Pedro, the powerful head of a wealthy Mexican family whose world is shaken when Keanu Reeves' character arrives at their vineyard in Napa Valley. Quinn, never one to sugarcoat his opinions, had nothing but praise for Arau. He saw in him a shared background and a shared understanding of the work, and the respect ran both ways. Arau later said working with Quinn was a dream. At first, he was intimidated by the legend standing in front of him. Minutes later, that fear melted away, replaced by friendship and admiration. To Arau, Quinn wasn't just a star. He was a giant, and a surprisingly modest one at that. As the years went on, Quinn began shifting his focus. Acting remained part of his life, but art started to take center stage. From the early 1980s onward, he exhibited paintings and sculptures in cities across the world, from Vienna to Paris to Seoul. When asked how he described his work, he shrugged it off, calling it Mexican abstract and leaving it at that. He believed his revolutionary upbringing shaped his creative spirit, whether on canvas or on screen. Art dealers knew his fame helped his work sell, and Quinn never denied it. He also never pretended to be above influence. He openly admitted to stealing techniques from the greats, pointing out that every major artist did the same. In his mind, borrowing was for amateurs. Real talent stole and made it their own. By this point, Quinn was a painter, a sculptor, an actor, and still a worker at heart. He often said he started working the moment he started walking, helping his mother gather sticks for firewood just to sell them. Stopping, to him, wasn't rest. It was confusion. He wouldn't know what to do with himself. Still, there were two roles he hoped to finish before slowing down: Leo Tolstoy and Pablo Picasso. He was fascinated by their lives, by their contradictions, and by the way genius aged inside them. Tolstoy, who finally left his wife at 81 only to die days later. Picasso, who shocked the world by practicing monogamy from 75 to 92. Quinn had already invested his own money developing scripts, driven by the same curiosity that had fueled his career from the beginning. In 1996, he gave everyone another scare when he was hospitalized after experiencing chest pains at his vacation home. At 81, he was placed in the cardiac care unit in Rhode Island, and details were kept quiet. He recovered, as he had before, but time was slowly catching up. Quinn spent his final years in Bristol, Rhode Island. On June 3, 2001, he passed away in a Boston hospital at the age of 86. The cause was respiratory failure, a complication from radiation treatments for lung cancer. His death was confirmed by his longtime friend, Providence Mayor Buddy Cianci, and with it, the curtain finally fell on a life that had never known how to stand still. His personal life was as expansive as his career. Married 3 times and father to 13 children, Quinn lived without apology. He loved fiercely, worked endlessly, and refused to shrink himself for anyone. When he looked back on his career, one achievement mattered most to him. He had fought to change how Mexican and Native American characters were portrayed on screen. From the beginning, he demanded dignity where there had once been stereotypes. During the filming of The Children of Sanchez in 1978, he made it clear that this fight was personal. He wanted audiences to see depth, intelligence, and humanity where Hollywood had once offered only caricature. That mission had shaped his career for decades. Even in his early role in the Oxbow incident in 1943, he pushed boundaries by playing a Mexican character who spoke multiple languages, a quiet but powerful rejection of the flat roles offered at the time. In the end, Anthony Quinn didn't just leave behind films, paintings, and sculptures. He left behind a standard, a reminder that art, when done honestly, could challenge how people see the world and themselves. Anthony Quinn just broke silence on Charles Bronson and It's Bad. For decades, whenever Anthony Quinn sat down for an interview, he knew what was coming. People always wanted to hear about the legends he worked with, the big names, the strong personalities. But there was one name that usually slowed him down, sometimes even stopped him cold: Charles Bronson. It's interesting because back in their prime, you couldn't really talk about one without mentioning the other. They were the definition of tough guys, men who carried a raw, rugged masculinity to the screen and made danger feel real. Not performed, real. And at one point, they even shared that screen together. That moment came in 1968 with Guns for San Sebastian, a French Western that carried more weight than most people realized at the time. The story was adapted from a 1962 novel called A Wall for San Sebastian, written by a Jesuit priest named William Barnaby Faherty, which already gives you a sense that this wasn't just another shoot-'em-up. The film was directed by Henri Verneuil and featured a strong international cast led by Quinn, Anjanette Comer, and Bronson himself. The movie had a soul, and a lot of that came from the details. Ennio Morricone composed the score, and he was so proud of the work that he later used it as the foundation for the main theme in The Mercenary. Visually, the production traveled all the way to Mexico, filming in the Sierra de Organos National Park near Sombrerete. It was a rare move for a French Western, which usually relied on Spain or European locations to stand in for the frontier. This one went straight to the source. You can feel it in the dust, the light, the wide open spaces. But years later, when Quinn finally spoke openly about Bronson, the conversation shifted away from film trivia and into something deeper. He didn't chase drama or headlines. Instead, he talked about the man behind the mask. Most people, Quinn felt, completely misunderstood Bronson. The public saw him as an unbreakable wall of stone, a man carved from pure toughness. But Quinn knew that was just the armor Bronson wore to move through the world. Underneath it was someone who had dragged himself up from nothing, someone shaped by hunger, fear, and survival. That part, Quinn understood better than most. He recognized the same struggle in Bronson that lived in him. They both came from places where strength wasn't optional, and weakness was dangerous. Quinn believed that shared past was exactly what gave Bronson his heavy presence on screen. Every time he stood still, every time he said nothing, the weight of that life came with him. Some critics like to call Bronson one-dimensional, but Quinn never agreed with that. To him, Bronson was precise. He didn't waste words. His silences were deliberate, his movements controlled. That kind of restraint wasn't accidental. It took intelligence, discipline, and absolute confidence in who you were. Bronson could dominate a scene without raising his voice, without a speech, without a single dramatic flourish. You felt him the moment he appeared, and you couldn't look away. Quinn also had his own theory about why Bronson was seen as distant or unapproachable in Hollywood. He wasn't cruel or arrogant, he was guarded. When you grow up fighting just to exist, trust doesn't come easy. For Bronson, that toughness wasn't an act. It was protection. He learned early that showing weakness invited exploitation, and he carried that lesson with him straight into the film industry. Despite their similarities, Quinn knew they weren't the same. He admitted that Bronson was far more of a loner. Quinn loved people, noise, energy, the messiness of life. Bronson needed silence. Distance gave him control. And in an industry that constantly tried to smooth actors out and fit them into neat, marketable shapes, that distance was how he stayed himself. In the end, Quinn saw Bronson as more than a movie star. He saw him as a symbol, not of violence or revenge, but of the working man who refuses to stay down. Audiences connected to Bronson because he looked like someone who had actually lived the pain his characters carried. There was nothing fake about him. When Quinn finally shared these reflections, he wasn't building a myth. He was tearing one down, gently, to reveal the human being inside it. Bronson wasn't perfect. None of them were. But his strength was honest, and that honesty is rare. That's the legacy Quinn left behind when he spoke about Bronson. Not gossip, not rivalry, just the quiet respect of one survivor recognizing another, and acknowledging a man who left a mark on cinema that still hasn't faded.